Right, okay, well, I'm Justin Walker, and the title of my talk is Bankers, Bradburys, and the Carnage on the Western Front. Now, had it been 3 weeks ago, it was going to be, I demand the greenback pound, but something happened 3 weeks ago which has completely changed the course of everything. Now, before we start, I must say that this is an e-book that's been done by a very dear friend of mine called Nick Green up in Cumbria, and it's going to be available on the UK column site shortly. And if you look at that flyer that's floating around, there are other ways you can also access this ebook. It's free, and we just want to get the information out. Right, okay, this is where it starts. I pressed the long bar, he said. Ooh, right. Okay, I'm going to read this out because I think it's important that we all agree what the economic system is that we're up against. The financial system, the crooks. We've seen the crooks today so far in the law courts and in the police and, of course, now social services. But the real crooks are the ones operating in the City of London, the banks and everywhere else, because they are the people who are guiding the whole picture, and they are the ones who develop the system. So, with the exception of a few thousand very powerful people, the entire world's population, all 7 billion of us, are trapped into a criminal debt-creating banking system that has taken hundreds of years to perfect and to come to fruition. God, I can't read that now. Anyway, this system results in enslavement and servitude. It creates dreadful unhappiness amongst ordinary, decent people and causes wars, debt, starvation, pollution, and environmental destruction. It feeds on greed, fear, and division. It forces people onto the corporate treadmills of mass mindless production and mass mindless consumption. It uses lies, deception, intimidation, and entrapment at all times. It is a system that is so clever and so cunning that most of the world is completely oblivious to its existence. It is a system that allows a few winners at the expense of a huge number of losers. It is a system that considers itself to be unbeatable and indestructible, and is now so arrogant that it believes it can control everything and everyone on its terms. It is a system where psychopaths and sociopaths can flourish, and without question, the center of this system, the heart of this global corporate beast, is the innocent-sounding square mile known as the City of London. Put very simply, the banking dynasties, and by the way, that dynasties, have you noticed the word? It says dynasties. I think that's quite appropriate, really. Anyway, sorry, that's just an aside. Put very simply, the banking dynasties, such as the House of Rothschild, the Warburgs, and the Rockefellers, control the political processes around the world to such an extent that their network of private central banks have the right to create money completely out of thin air and then charge interest on that nothingness. The polite term is fractional reserve lending, but in reality it is just simple fraud. The result is that the whole world is currently drowning in a sea of fraudulent debt. What is happening to all of us is criminal. However, there is a very simple solution that the banking dynasties do not want you to know about. Here we begin the letter. Right, we're going to start as if I was doing this 4 weeks ago because I got it all prepared. This is the greenback dollar. So we're just going to look at the greenback dollar very briefly. But here's our hero, Abraham Lincoln. And this is one of his best quotes. I have two enemies, the Southern Army in front of me and the financial institutions in the rear. Of the two, the one in the rear is my greatest foe. Right, the greenback. Now, I'm a bit of a military student, I suppose, military history, and I don't know how many people know about the American Civil War and what happened, but when the American Civil War started, basically everyone thought that the North, which was largely industrialized and had the better army and navy, etc., would walk all over the South. And most commentators thought that the war would be over quite quickly, but the North would actually swallow up the South. What happened was you had the first Battle of Bull Run and another series of Confederate victories, And before long, Washington looked threatened, and the Union Army was in disarray. The Union generals had been out-generaled by the South, like General Lee and so forth. And just when Abraham Lincoln thought all his problems had come at once, suddenly his Treasury Minister knocked on the door and said, "We're running out of money." And so Abraham Lincoln thought, what the hell are we going to do? So the first thing you do, of course, you go to the bankers. And of course, the bankers were the City of London, the Rothschilds, and he approached them, and they said, yes, but it'll be between 24 and 36% interest. And of course, Abraham Lincoln knew if he basically went that way, if he won the war, the American economy would be ruined and nothing would come of it. Anyway, there was a colonel in the Union Army who was also a businessman, and a very rare businessman. He was a businessman with proven integrity, and his name was Colonel Dick Taylor from Illinois. And he just got a meeting with Abraham Lincoln and said, look, mate, there's nothing whatsoever to stop you from creating money based on nothing more than the integrity of your government. Actually, when you look at it that way, when you look at our government, that's why I like to say based on the wealth of the nation and the integrity of the nation, because if you're based on the integrity of our politicians, I don't think there'd be enough there for a meal at McDonald's. Anyway, but Abraham Lincoln, in his document, Senate document number 23, page 91, 1865, after he gave the okay for the greenback dollar, he said this: the government should create, issue, and circulate all the currency and credit needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying power of consumers. The privilege of creating and issuing money is not only the supreme prerogative of government, but it is the government's greatest creative opportunity. By the adoption of these principles, the long-felt want for a uniform medium will be satisfied. The taxpayers will be saved immense sums of interest, discounts, and exchanges. The financing of all public enterprises, the maintenance of stable government, and ordered progress, and the conduct of the Treasury will become matters of practical administration. The people can and will be furnished with a currency as safe as their own government. Money will cease to be the master and become the servant of humanity. I love that. Money will cease to be the master and become the servant of humanity. Democracy will rise superior to the money power. Well, you can imagine what our friends in the City of London had to say. And sure enough, there was an extract in the Times of London dated 1865, and it said, if that mischievous financial policy, which had its origin in the North American Republic, should become indurated down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off debts and be without a debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will become prosperous beyond precedent in the history of the civilized governments of the world. The brains and the wealth of all countries will go to North America. That government must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe. So I think that gives a rather big thumbs up to the greenback dollar. So basically, I sort of thought, well, why not a greenback pound? Common sense. And about 3 weeks ago, the phone went. Now, I have to be careful here because I can't go into all the details because it involves a family member. But anyway, but I will just tell you this. I am pretty certain that the phone call the message came from somebody who was an insider in the Bank of England. And the chap who gave me the message said, you won't be able to trace this call. I tried 1471, nothing. I'm very naive, you know. But he said, Bradbury. And I said, well, can I get a pen and paper? Do you know how it is? Is it, I don't know what it is, but any phone you've got, pen and paper, that's where you should, in case somebody rings up with an emergency. Did I have a pen? Did I have a paper? No. So I kept this poor bugger, hanging around. Eventually got it, wrote down Bradbury. And he said, good, do your research. And with that, the phone call disappeared. So I did. I looked up Bradbury. I got someone who started Star Trek. Was it Star Trek or something? Someone called Bradbury or something? I got onto science fiction. I thought, bloody hell, this is going to be a bit hard. This is going to be a hard one to sell to the British Constitution Group. Martian dollars. So I was getting a bit worried by this time. And then I came across a guy called Thomas Johnston. How many in this room have heard of Thomas Johnston? Show off. No, he really is a rather nice politician. He was a socialist MP in the 1930s, and his main claim to fame is that he basically organised the hydroelectric schemes up in Scotland. He was the father of those. And he really did so. He looked as though he's really doing a lot for his people up in Scotland. Anyway, he wrote a book called The Financiers and the Nation by the Right Honourable Thomas Johnston, Privy Councillor, ex-Lord Privy Seal. And as I say, it was written in 1934. So let's go to the next slide. And now, the British version of the debt-free greenback. I welcome you to the Bradbury. Now, forgive me if I appear to read, but I think it's important I do read this, and I'll read it slowly because it really does sum the whole thing up. And this is from his book, Chapter 6, and you can get it online, this book. As I said, The Financiers and the Nation. And Chapter 6 is entitled Usury on the Great War. When the whistle blew for the start of the Great War in August 1914, the Bank of England possessed only 9 million sterling of gold reserve. And as the Bank of England was the banker's bank, this sum constituted the effective reserve of all the other banking institutions in Great Britain. Private enterprise banking, thus being on the verge of collapse, the government, Mr. Lloyd George at the time was Chancellor of the Exchequer, hurriedly declared a moratorium, i.e. it authorised the banks not to pay out, which in any event the banks could not do, and it extended the August bank holiday for another 3 days. During these 3 days, but during that time they had the Currency and Notes Act of 6th of August 1914, so I'll carry on. And during these 3 days, when the banks and stock exchanges were closed, the bankers held anxious negotiation with the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And one of them has placed upon record the fact that he, Mr. Lloyd George, did everything that we asked him to do. When the banks reopened, the public discovered that instead of getting their money back in gold, they were paid in a new legal tender of treasury notes, the £1 notes in black and the 10-shilling notes in red colours. This new currency had been issued by the state, was backed by the credit of the state, and was issued to the banks to prevent the banks from utter collapse. The public cheerfully accepted the new notes, and nobody talked about inflation. To return, however, to the early war period, no sooner had Mr. Lloyd George got the bankers out of their difficulties in the autumn of 1914 by the issue of Treasury money than they were round again at the Treasury door explaining forcibly that the state must upon no account issue any more money on this interest-free basis. If the war was to be run, it must be run with borrowed money, money upon which interest must be paid. And they were the gentlemen who would see to the proper financing of a good, juicy war loan at 3.5% interest. And to that last proposition, the Treasury yielded. The war was not to be fought with interest-free money and or with conscription of wealth, though it was to be fought with conscription of life. Many small businesses were to be closed and their proprietors sent overseas as redundant and without any compensation for their losses, while finance, as we shall see, was to be heavily and progressively remunerated. So what does this all mean? It means as hundreds of thousands of British troops, and of course French troops, Russian troops, it doesn't matter where because the same central bankers were plying their trade. It meant, whilst our people were slaughtered on the battlefields of Passchendaele, the Somme, Ypres, you go on, you've seen the pictures of the First World War. Well, let me just tell you now that at the beginning of the First World War, in 1914, our national debt was £650 million. By the end of the First World War, it was £7,500 million. In other words, the bankers had plunged the nation into appalling debt, and of course with debt comes control. Now, as you can see, the reason it's called Bradbury, by the way, in case you hadn't noticed, it's signed by John Bradbury, and he was obviously a senior Treasury official. So they were commonly called Bradburys, but the Bradburys actually did carry on. And here's just an interesting aside. Nick Green, who did all the work for me, doing all this IT stuff, his father passed away very recently, and in one of his drawers, Nick came across this note and was very excited, and it turns out to be a latter-day Bradbury. It's one dating, we think, from about 1923, 24, something like that, but the Bradburys were still issued on a much smaller scale, right up to, I think, about 1927, something like that. But here's the interesting bit. Now, I'll just show you another picture of the Bradbury on the other side, and there. Okay. Now, I went on to the Her Majesty's Treasury's Debt Management Office website because I was just interested to see if the Treasury ever admitted to issuing its own money, debt-free, interest-free, directly to the people to help the people. I just wondered, surely they wouldn't. And I wasn't disappointed. I'll read what is on their website. And this is their account of the opening of the First World War. The threat of World War I pushed British banks into crisis, exacerbated further as half of the world's trade was financed by British banks, and as a consequence, international payments dried up. In response to this crisis, John Maynard Keynes, the renowned economist, persuaded the Chancellor, Lloyd George, to use the Bank of England's gold reserves to support the banks, which ended the immediate crisis. Well, forgive me, what our friend said, Mr. Johnston, he said it was because it was only 9 million in the bank that the Treasury had to rush out all these notes, and they issued in 1914 £300 million worth of these notes, and they went on. There's a lot of money was issued this way. So what's going on here? Now, I intend to follow this up because, the Treasury is not telling the truth, or Mr. Johnston's not telling the truth, and I rather imply that if it's probably the latter who are perhaps not telling the truth. So there we have it. This is something that happened back in 1914, not the American Civil War, and it's a simple act of the Treasury issuing its own money to meet the needs, and I'm going to say happiness, of the British people. Obviously it was wartime, that's not happy, but there is nothing to stop our Treasury tomorrow from issuing debt-free and interest-free money to meet all the needs and happiness of our nation. So we now have to start asking them a very difficult question. Now, you've probably seen a flyer on your chair, and on that flyer, I've posed a question. And in fact, the first time I posed this, is Penny in the room? Where's Penny? Oh, there you are, Penny. Right, you witnessed what happened when I read this question to Tim Farron, our illustrious, in inverted commas, MP. Tim Farron, he's president of the Lib Dems. And the question is, why can't the British government, through its Treasury, issue debt-free and interest-free money based upon the commonwealth and integrity of this country, worth trillions? Why do our politicians go straight to the private bankers, the House of Rothschild and the like, who simply create money completely out of thin air, just figures on a computer screen, and when this money, or more accurately, this nothingness, is received by our government, we as taxpayers start paying the exorbitant interest which is currently costing the British people in real money at least £125 million a day, or more than £44 billion a year. It's more like 50 billion now, isn't it? I mean, our national debt alone is 1.2 trillion or whatever it is. Well, when I asked Tim Farron that question, what did he do, Penny? The truth is, the politicians don't want to know because they're scared, because they know this is the silver bullet that will save the nation's economy. Now, what I've said here In 1914, we saw the Bradbury. 2014 will be the 100th anniversary of the Bradbury. And this is something perhaps to really focus our attention on putting real pressure on the politicians and the media to say, why can't the Treasury issue Treasury notes for the benefit of all of us? We can get rid of our deficit and everything else. And I'd just like to say this, we're going to work carefully with Lawful Bank, because Lawful Bank is empowering people at the grassroots. This is to show our politicians what they can do to save our country by one simple action. Now, I'm not an economist, but so far I've not found an economist who dare take me on with this, but I have a whole feeling. Well, look, I'm going to finish because I want to try and get a bit of your time back for you. So I'm just going to, because I'm quite a hero now of Mr. Johnston, and I feel it's only right that I should end with the last 4 lines that he wrote here. And it said, "The machinations of the organized money power during the stress of war would surely provide the most convincing of evidence that the nation must be the sole creator of money and the guardian and banker of the savings and thrift of its citizens, if well-being and security are ever to be the common lot of men and women." Now, that was written in 1934, and as a visionary, I think, well, I would like to think that when we're successful, we might stick a statue up to old Johnston. I've got a soft spot for the old boy. But listen, thank you very much for listening to me. That's lovely.